Well, good morning. My name's John Ing, and I'm the mayor of the city of Missoula, and thank you for joining us this afternoon here on the lawn of the beautiful Missoula County Courthouse. Small housekeeping item. I did not go to a rave last night. This is what you get if you're visiting someone at Providence St. Patrick Hospital, and it's more precious than gold, so I'm not taking it off. I don't have a mask on because we're outside, and I've got double vaccines, as do the folks behind me. And it's a pleasure to actually be able to talk with all of you out in the open and unencumbered by a microphone. We're here today because we believe that the challenge of unhoused residents in the city of Missoula and Missoula County has reached a critical point. And we believe that we, as local government, have a responsibility to both the folks who are unhoused and the folks who support this community through their generosity, and the folks who call Missoula home and love the place. We believe that we have an obligation to everyone. And we also believe that we have an opportunity today to begin a process that will serve more people more often in more humane ways. The challenge of being unhoused is that you don't have a place to live. And so because this is such a critical issue for our community, what we have elected to do, the county commissioners and I working with staff, is to deploy an incident command team to help us treat this as a critical incident in the county and the city. Our goal here is to find housing that is safe and stable and meets people where they are if they are unhoused today, while simultaneously ensuring that our public spaces, our recreational lands, our parks and our trails remain safe and open for all users. And one of the critical messages today is safety. It ain't safe to camp on the West Broadway Island. It is not safe to camp on the West Reserve Island for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is floodwaters this time of year. And so we believe we have an opportunity to improve the circumstances of those folks who have no choice today other than to camp in those places or camp elsewhere in the urban wild where camping is not legal for a whole bunch of reasons. We also believe that we have an opportunity to work together as the critical part of the pandemic appears to be tempering. And the repercussions appear to be ramping up. We believe that there will be more unhoused folks in our community, just like there are increasing numbers of unhoused people throughout the Mountain West. And if you've listened to public radio recently, you've heard stories about Spokane, Washington, and Boise, Idaho, and other places in the Mountain West that are experiencing much of what Missoula is experiencing today. Remarkably tight housing market, incredibly expensive housing, not much to rent and not much opportunity, which means that more and more people are at risk. And as I like to remind folks, most of us maybe a paycheck or two away from being there ourselves. The problem of being unhoused is not simple. The solutions are not simple. So we take incremental steps as local government to do the best that we can, working with our partners in the community and resources. Here's what I know. There are people in this community who think that I ought to run every person who doesn't have a home out of town. I'm not going to do that for a variety of reasons. A, it's immoral. Second, we can't. Turns out there's a Constitution in the United States, and we have an obligation to one another, and everyone has rights in our community. So we're going to protect those rights and serve those people. Simultaneously, I have folks who believe that anybody should be able to camp anywhere at any time, and it's not a problem. And that's not the case either. There are folks whose quality of life depends on the investments they've made publicly in our parkland or in their homes, and I think it is a reasonable expectation that no one is camping in their yard or their alley or those public spaces for a variety of reasons. So where are we? We're in the middle somewhere, and we need to approach this systematically. So what we've done through our incident command structure is, as someone once said, if you have a problem, point it at the right person. The right person in this case is Adrienne Beck and her team. Adrienne led us through our vaccine coordination. She's led us through much of the pandemic response, and we believe she and her team are up to the task today. Adrienne is assigned with her team to find places for safe shelter in our community. So if you are unhoused today, we want to find places where you can legally, safely camp, where you can legally, safely park your RV or your vehicle if that's where you're living, or we can find you a quality shelter in a hotel room or any other hard-sided, plumbed facility we can. The ultimate goal is to find permanent, stable, supportive housing for everyone who is unhoused. But this incremental step is to get us to a place where unhoused folks aren't facing the daily emergency of trying to figure out where to sleep that can be safe, where they can have some of the simple necessities of life and feel comfortable and also get the help that they need to move on to the next stage. You're seeing some folks here in the audience today wearing orange. That is our homeless outreach team. These are folks who are on the ground every day, meeting our unhoused friends and neighbors where they are and trying to find them safe passage to the next place they're going to live. And they have success. But this work is slow, and it is labor intensive. And so our hope as a function of finding safe places for people to be is that we can shore up that team so that they have more resources and more boots on the ground trying to help folks, again, meeting them where they are. And they've done a fantastic job. We just need to do more of it. The second piece here is once we have identified those spots, we will engage in a public process, the commissioners and I, to figure out which of these safe places is feasible for us to tip up temporary safe shelter for our unhoused folks. We've done that on a smaller scale today at what I call the Unhoused Ranch, just south of the Bitterroot River. We're going to need to find more alternatives and potentially scattered sites to do that. Here's the problem. Nobody's going to like it. But we believe that we have a responsibility, despite that, to solve for this problem. And you can't have both. You can't have nobody unhoused without making investment in finding them a place to live. So that's where we meet in the middle, and that's where we attempt to solve this problem. So once we've established a list of potential sites, commissioners and I will work together through a public process to establish those sites. And again, there will be controversy, but we'll lead through it because we believe in what we need to do here today to avoid some of the mistakes that other communities have made. Second, Adrienne and her team, once those sites are established, will be working with the community and our many partners who provide human services, along with investment from the city and county. We don't know what that looks like yet because we're not there, to ensure that these places are safe, sanitary, that people have what they need to live and survive, and with luck, thrive as we move on. And then finally, all of this is on our way to ensuring that everyone who wants or needs an indoor home has access to that. That is absolutely consistent with our 10-year plan to end homelessness. It's absolutely consistent with the policies and practices of both Missoula County and the city of Missoula. And again, we're redoubling our efforts to get there sooner than later. There are a number of projects that are coming online, but they're 2 years out. Trinity is 2 years out. Villaggio is 2 years out. These projects that will provide affordability to lots of folks, or in some cases, folks who have no resources who will need housing, they're a couple of years out, and we need to solve for this today as quickly as we can and as incrementally as we can. So those are the steps we're taking. I am grateful for the compassion and thoughtfulness and leadership that my friends, Commissioner Strohmeyer, Vero, and Slotnick are bringing to this, as well as all of the work that staff is bringing to this, and our agency partners in the community. There's a lot of work to be done here. It will be imperfect. In some cases, it will be painful, but it will bear fruit. And ultimately, our goal is to make sure that humans are housed in our community. With that, commissioners, whoever wants to follow suit. Commissioner Strohmeyer.
Thanks for all of you joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Strohmeyer. I'm the current chair of the Missoula Board of County Commissioners. Thank you, Mayor Engen. Missoula County government is proud to stand here with the city of Missoula working on yet again an intractable problem, a seemingly intractable problem in our midst. In this case, folks who are unsheltered and unhoused. And yet again, we are willing to set aside the hand-wringing. Those days are over. The time for action is upon us. And some might ask, what are we doing differently now? Why are we doing this now rather than at some point in the past? Well, I think you'll hear from all of us that we are firm believers in not simply trying the same thing and expecting different results. For some time now, we have tried innumerable different approaches to addressing housing, the housing crisis in our midst, and particularly what we're talking about today, those who are most vulnerable, unsheltered, camping out in the urban wild. We are, make no mistake about it, friends, we are experiencing a public health, a humanitarian, and environmental crisis on the streets and within the parks of our community. By standing up this incident management team, we are bringing the focused resources necessary to avoid just a lot of good intentions and diffuse effort, but bringing those focused resources to find the places that Mayor Engen just mentioned that will be those safe, secure receiving zones for folks to move to while we put them on a trajectory for solid housing down the road. We're a caring community, but we're also a very creative community. And at this juncture, this is our moment, Missoula County, to demonstrate how we can set a different path, how we can set a different course forward to take care of those who are most vulnerable, but also at the same time recognizing impacts, broader community impacts that simply cannot go unaddressed any longer. That is my exclamation point on the points that Mayor Engen just mentioned. We look forward to kicking this off, and you will hear shortly from Adrienne Beck, our Director of our Office of Emergency Management. But before we hear from her, I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Commissioner Josh Slotnick.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for everybody who's coming out today. So I just wanted to let you know a couple things we have learned while watching this unfold. Two simultaneous truths. We got to hold these both at the same time. One is not greater than the other. It doesn't matter which order I recite them to you in. When people are camping illegally in the urban wild, they create a level of squalor and environmental degradation that is not tolerable. When people camp illegally in the urban wild, they live in that squalor and they cannot move their own lives forward. Imagine if you were spending all of your energy worrying about the security of your person and your stuff. You're not going to get anything else done. You see people without houses pushing their belongings along. They have to carry them with them because if they don't, someone will pilfer the little they have. People who are stuck in this situation are making a mess and they can't improve their lives. We found by setting up the TSOS last fall that people who have a modicum of shelter, enough safety and security and services so they don't have to spend all of their mental energy worrying about the security of their person and their stuff, then they can move themselves forward. They can get IDs, they can get jobs, they can seek the services that we have aplenty, but you can't get those services if you're living off the grid. And yes, we're going to spend some money to do this. That should knock people back. We can't possibly spend any money. Well, we are already spending money. We are already paying a cost. When you drive by the Reserve Street encampment and you see it and you feel offended because it's a stand on our soul that our brothers and sisters live this way, or maybe you're just pissed because you hate looking at it, that's a cost we're paying. And when those folks use the emergency room like a doctor and they use emergency services, whenever they have a problem, that's also a cost. So we're going to go forward. We're going to use initially some ARPA money and take advantage of what we've learned, that when we provide people safe, secure shelter with a modicum of services, they don't make a mess, and they actually improve their lives. And if we can do this right now, the problem is still small enough, I believe we can get a handle on it, we won't ever look like Seattle. But anybody who's visited recently, that is intolerable, and it's almost unimaginable. If 10 years ago you saw a picture of Seattle now, you wouldn't believe it. How could that happen? It's because nobody did what we are about to try and do now. And as the mayor said and Dave said, it's going to be imperfect. People are going to be pissed. And it's going to kind of work. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to my friend and colleague Juanita, who can talk about all kinds of other good stuff.
We really want to get to the meat and potatoes with Adrian here, but we also wanted to share a bit about the public process, because I know folks have a lot of questions about how are we going to include the public. And so as the mayor had said, Adrian and her team are going to find and bring forward a suite of solutions to mayor, city council, and to the county commissioners. And at a public meeting, we're going to need your input and your criticism and your creativity and also your support. You can find, we're going to have a website, email address at solutions@missoulacounty.us, where you'll be able to comment. And we really value your comments and expect, yes, the meat and potatoes and some really creative, thoughtful, Missoula-made solutions to this situation here. So, Adrian.
Well, as they say, emergency management is about expectations management, so you're not going to get a whole lot of meat and potatoes today. But what we will do is, as the mayor and the commissioners have discussed, when we have an issue that we need to bring multiple parties together to find creative solutions, the incident command system is often deployed. This isn't a fire, this isn't a flood, but the same concepts will prevail, in that we will use objectives-based management. The objectives that they've given us are pretty clear, and what you've heard today is we will find solutions and options for consideration when we look at basic human needs being met in a safe and secure location. As Juanita mentioned, solutions@missoulacounty.us is a website, is an email address that's been set up and established because we don't have all the answers. This is going to take the community working together to solve this problem. So if you have a great idea, jot it down in an email, send it off for the team to give consideration to. This process will not be perfect. It will be quick, in that we aim to engage service providers and subject matter expertise into our planning cycle so that we can quickly bring those solutions and options to elected officials so that they can begin the public process. That public process will take time. Implementation will take time, but it's time to start something new. Thank you.
Yeah, so the question was how about folks who are resistant to permanent housing? I leave that to the folks who know what they're doing, right? So part of this interdisciplinary team is going to be, the team will be comprised of experts and folks who know far more about that and far more about meeting people where they are. I think this is, there's some opportunity for myth busting here. I think the notion that living on the street is a choice is a myth, and I think it's been dispelled over and over again. And I think we attach moral judgment to human circumstance, and I guarantee you that that most of the folks who are living on the street today wouldn't be living on the street if there were alternatives available to them. And we're going to provide those and see how it goes. So, so the question is, what data are we using to decide that this is a critical issue? And I will tell you that it's both anecdotal and what we see in our emergency response and what we've seen during the course of the pandemic in terms of the number of folks who are unhoused. All pandemic exacerbates everything, right? So our existing shelters are taxed and not able to operate at capacity. That's an issue. We see it in our calls, our mobile support team, our calls for first responders, et cetera, and frankly calls from the public who are saying, you know, what are you doing? What are you doing? We recently completed a citizen survey. We don't have all the results yet, but among the most critical issues facing this community, according to the folks who were scientifically surveyed, is homelessness.
And just a quick follow-up, do we know how many people are unhoused in Missoula County?
You know, depending on the day, so our last point-in-time homeless count, which we do every year, we were just shy of about 400. That number has been up to 1,000 or more. And part of our challenge here is as a function of pandemic. We're not sure how accurate that count is. Again, anecdotally, you can count on roughly 10% of the population that's unhoused at any time to be chronically unhoused, right? They're not couch surfing, they're not between places, living with relatives, et cetera, et cetera. They just don't have a place to go and aren't going to have a place to go until we help solve that as a community for them.
So just to add on to that answer, so how do we know there's an issue and why do we need to respond now? So besides hearing from members of the public, service providers, we've also heard loud and clear from our very own City County Public Health Department that there are sanitation issues that just simply cannot go on any longer along the Clark Fork River, along places such as the Reserve Street encampment, where there are many folks unsheltered, living in and contributing to some fairly unsanitary conditions. We just cannot tolerate this any longer, which again, in the spirit of not trying the same thing and expecting different results, now is the time to try something that is different and figure out a way to ameliorate and mitigate those just clearly unacceptable conditions on the ground.
Dave, while you're mic up, quick question though, how do we keep from bumping it further out into the county? Because, you know, you chase them off Reserve Street, you might come up with a location, but how do you keep from moving them further out into places like Deep Creek or South Shore Road where there's already a lot of campsites?
Do you want to go for it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So first, I just got to call you out on that word. We're not chasing anybody off anywhere. So we got to dispel that. We're not arresting people. We're not chasing them off. What we're going to do is we're going to create alternative housing for the alternative to what people have right now, which is a tent, and then invite them to come with us or leave where they are of their own accord. And admittedly, there may be a few people left after that, and if those folks are where they can't be because it's illegal, then we'll figure out what we're going to do. But we're not chasing anybody anywhere. We found through the TSOS that when we actually create something and invite people, things start to get better. So, and why are people not going to go to Deep Creek? Well, I'm just gonna go with my gut here on this, and that people who don't have much live close to people who have a lot, because all of us create a wake behind us, like the way a boat makes a wake, and that wake is full of useful garbage. And if you're living on what you can scrounge, you're going to be as close to that wake as possible. If you go way up Deep Creek, there's nobody throwing anything out there that you could live off of, unless you can drive your own rig up there and camp, which in that case you're kind of in a one notch up from the people we're talking about.
My question while you've got the mic though, Josh, I know you talked about like this is a new problem in Seattle. I can remember 30 years ago standing in 100 people by the King Dome in one of the biggest camps that hundreds of people that they'd seen. So how do we like do something different here, especially coming off our 10-year plan?
Sure. So in Seattle 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it wasn't what it is now. I'm not saying there was no problem then, but it wasn't anything like it is now. Same thing in LA and in Portland. And we're just doing guesswork at this point. The idea is, though, if we set ourselves up with this commitment that we are going to get people into some type of a modicum of services, safe, secure shelter, and not tolerate people camping illegally in the urban wild. Camping legally is fine. Camping illegally is not fine. Then we don't get into a situation where we have people living under tarps on Ryman Street. That's the hope.
And the investment, sorry. And the community investment in upstream action. So we're not just dealing at the end, at the mouth of the river, if you will. We need to work on tributaries. So that's early childhood development, early family support, services, education that we all offer here. I see Hope Rescue Mission, United Way right here, Sheriff's Department, teachers, this community. So we need to also focus and invest in the tributary work to address this downstream crisis.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Dennis. So, yeah, there have been people camping at Reserve Street Bridge for decades. And you could probably point to other places in our community where folks have been unsheltered, unhoused, living in what we're calling the urban wild. As you point out, in other communities, the same. What we've seen exacerbated during the course of this pandemic and with the broader social scene that we're living through, these challenges are as great as they have ever been in our community. And I can also think back decades when we've been having some of these same conversations, but to no avail. What we have seen as of late, and you've heard this referenced here earlier today, is that we have a success story, I believe, in our midst, the temporary safe outdoor space on the other side of Buckhouse Bridge. Another example of taking some action that had not been taken before, and frankly, that many of us feared would be a failure. And make no mistake about it, we ought not to ever let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So we need to try something different. We have a model of how this could potentially work out well. And so let's be as creative as possible to address the challenges at hand and not kick this down the road to a future generation.
Thank you, commissioners. I will just add that we're working with the system we got, and it ain't great. Government's been in the process of being dismantled for decades now. And some of this work used to happen at the state and federal level. It's not happening anymore. So here we are trying to solve it, much as we're trying to solve so many other challenges in our communities because states and the feds have abdicated that responsibility. Now, fortunately, we have some resources as a function of President Biden's American Recovery Act. We're going to put that to work in hopes of recovering. But these, as Dave says, these intractable problems are now the province of local governments, and we don't think we can continue to shy away from them. Got Dave?
Yeah, you talked about shoring up the homeless outreach team, and you have 3 of them here today. Would you be talking about committing city and county funding to expand that team, or can you be more specific on that?
The question was whether we would invest in expanding the homeless outreach team and other responsible parties and agencies. The answer is yes. And in fact, we had a conversation with the Poverello last week talking about that very thing. What do they need in terms of resources to make a difference in a really challenging circumstance?
I asked this again because of what I saw in Seattle. They employed a lot of they found leadership within the homeless community to help drive some of that. Is there any thinking of getting them involved as you kind of expand and do this thing? You're looking for leaders to, sort of jump up in that community.
Well, absolutely. And I think our friends from the homeless outreach team will tell you today that they have lived experience in some cases. And again, they're meeting people where they are and having real human conversations and trying to solve. And I'd be happy to recruit from folks who have that experience. And I think collectively we all would. Commissioners, anything to add to those 2 questions?
There are 5 of them back there.
Josh?
Conservative estimates would place 19 million Americans at risk of eviction in the coming months over the summer. Extrapolate those numbers to Missoula, and we got about 4,000 people that are at risk of eviction in our community right here. Is this program and these measures, are they going to be robust enough to meet that need? That's going to be an increased need over and above what we're currently seeing.
So this team isn't directly charged with that, but we have other partners in our agencies working on that. Josh, there's $150 million sitting at the state right now, give or take, for folks who are struggling to pay the rent, and for some reason they ain't getting out the door. And that's either an access issue, it's a hassle issue, it's a communication issue. But our staff is working today on trying to sort that. I've also got a meeting scheduled with property managers to ensure that they're aware that they're not at risk, that we can mitigate their risk, and they can get out of the eviction business by simply helping us help their tenants stay where they are.
Well, I hope that's true, but come the end of the eviction moratorium, we're going to see a crowd of landlords lined up at the county courthouse to perform civic evictions, larger than this crowd here. And those people are going to be joining the numbers of unhoused. We're going to lose them as community members unless we take robust action. The TSOS serves 40 people very well. That's 1% of the projected folks that face eviction this summer.
I get it. We're leaning into it. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Just wanted to emphasize something the mayor said, $150 million at the state right now for rental assistance. That they are holding on to it like I'm holding on to this microphone. We could figure out how to pry it loose, maybe we could address some of what you're talking about.
All right, any other press questions? Yes, ma'am.
Wondering how many people were removed from the West Broadway site that was mentioned in the press release, and what was some of the resolution there for those folks?
So, my recollection is about 30 people have been camping around the West Broadway site. Yep.
And would those people find space at the temporary shelter?
They could, and that's part of our challenge, right? So we're not in the business of clearing that Reserve Street site until we have some place for people to go. And that was a challenge at Broadway, and if I had it to do over again, we'd have some place for those folks to go rather than just move, most likely, to Reserve Street.
So did the folks at West Broadway who opted for it have room at the temporary shelter, the outdoor safe space?
The temporary shelter is operating at capacity today, and what we hope to do here, in addition to all this, is expand that capacity because we have a model that works.
So no.
Sorry.
So
No.
did folks who were okay?
No.
No.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, maybe.
Just wanted to reiterate the order of things at Reserve Street. So first, we'll hear back from Adrienne and her team. She's going to bring us a bunch of possibilities, some options, and we'll engage with the mayor and the city council on a whole bunch of public process. We'll figure out what that receiving zone can be. Then we may have to build it or stand it up or create something on top of what's already there. And not until we have a place for people to go will we go to Reserve Street and invite people to come with us.
If I'm misremembering this, please correct me, but the reference to people being asked to leave the West Broadway island.
I can't speak to that.
And there was at least one arrest made. It sounded like that situation.
There was an arrest made based on an incident of violence.
People asked to leave, and it sounds like there's capacity at the other site. So I'm wondering, kind of, if they were asked to leave, where those people had an option to go.
We didn't provide an option, and that's a problem, and that's why we're not going to repeat that exercise.
And you said that was about 30 people.
That's my best guess. Yeah.
The city, the press release, county city, said that there was resources and money offered to people. What did that look like?
In some cases, I think folks were offered hotel vouchers. I know that we provided food, money, water.
Are we talking like $20, $500?
Probably 20. Yep. Representative Tannenbaum.
I guess this question is for Josh. Josh, you mentioned no more or no chasing people. Does that mean no more sweeps?
I can just speak to Reserve Street because I wasn't in on we weren't in on this, on the Broadway Island stuff. So just the ordering again. We're going to create a space for people to go. After a whole bunch of public process and Adrienne's team does her work. Then we'll go to Reserve Street and invite people to take us up on that. They can come if they like. They can go somewhere else if they want. But we won't tolerate camping illegally in that space anymore. But we're not going to do that until we have places for people to actually go. So that's not a sweep. That's a, here's some housing if you would like to take it. And I feel like there's a real big distinction there.
Is there a rough estimate on how long that may take until you have that option?
Man, it really depends on the options we get and then the public process we engage in. It could be a month or 6 weeks. Maybe Adrian and her folks find one good thing. Maybe they find 6. We really don't know yet.
So then if that wasn't a county decision, how did that last sweep happen?
So that was a City of Missoula Parks and Recreation decision because we had so many folks down there, and we also had a call from the Missoula County Health Department saying that human fecal material was too close to the Clark Fork River, conditions were unsanitary, and that we needed to do something about it. Yeah, but we didn't have a landing zone for them, and that site is closed today for those very reasons, those environmental safety reasons. We're cleaning it up.
And you said the city wasn't going to do that again?
We won't do that until there is a place for people to go. But in the meantime, Broadway Island is closed, and doesn't matter whether you're a recreationist or someone seeking shelter, you'll be trespassed from that property until we get it cleaned.
So then with removing people without a landing site, was that a mistake? Or
Yes, I believe it was a mistake. Yep.
And so again, what we are trying to do and what we intend to do and will do is create options for folks. It's not an option to simply say, there's Interstate 90, get yourself out of town, nor is it simply an option to say, get yourself out of this neighborhood, this particular floodplain, and go somewhere else within Missoula. We need meaningful options that put folks on a path towards long-term housing and to truly address folks where they are. This is not easy, and it's not going to be particularly quick. It's at a person-by-person level because each individual who is without shelter, without housing, is a unique story with unique needs, but providing options is the first step.
If we want the environmental degradation to go away that comes from people living illegally in the urban wild, we have to get them housing. Get them housed in a shelter that's safe, secure, and have some services. If we want people to move their lives forward so they're not in this situation, we need to get them safe, secure shelter with a modicum of services. That's the goal here, straight up.
And what lessons have you learned from the TSOS as far as there's significant amount of community pushback from residents right around that area? What lessons have you learned in how to mitigate that or cut off some of the problems that have happened in advance?
So the question is about pushback on TSOS, et cetera. I also want to clarify before I turn the microphone over to commissioners that mistake was my mistake. I'm not throwing staff under the bus here, right? They had a call from the health department. They had calls from residents. They felt they needed to do something. In retrospect, or in hindsight, which is always brilliantly 2020, I think it was my mistake that I didn't have a conversation with staff about how we're going to do this, how we're going to proceed. So want to make it clear that I ain't blaming parks or cops or anyone else. It's just the way it happened was not ideal. And if I had it to do over, we'd do it over differently.
So pushback. So we're going to try and deal with this on the front end as much as possible with as robust a public process as we can handle. I think it's really important to know, we should all carry this too. The collective we, all of us, have created a group of people who the collective we believe are so detestable, we do not want to look at them from our own homes. We've created an untouchable caste. Wherever these folks, I'm already othering them, right? Wherever we find a place for people to be, folks who live nearby are going to be angry. This is an imperfect thing, and we just kind of have to suck it up and take our lumps and do the best public process we can.
So another follow-up there. What might we have done different with the TSOS in the past? Maybe done it a few years ago rather than in the midst of a pandemic when winter is bearing down on the community. And my hat's off to Hope Rescue Mission, to the United Way, to everyone who played a role in spinning that up as rapidly in the midst of a public health emergency. So from that standpoint, no regrets whatsoever other than we should have done this a long time ago. Danny.
I was just wondering if there will be notice to the public in advance
So,
Yes, yes.
and I'm personally just anticipating no one-night sweep where we're going to mass exodus 100 people or whatever it is. That's a terrible idea. A historically awful image. We're just not going to do that. What I'm imagining is working with the hot folks. Look how hot they are. Working with the hot folks and doing this over a period of time. It may take 2 weeks. It may take 3 weeks. There's not going to be a sweep with a bunch of angry dudes with billy clubs. Erase that image. That's not what we're doing. Yeah, the advance notice will be, it might take 2 or 3 weeks to move everyone if they want to go to better housing, and we're going to begin now. But I'm not anticipating, I'm just speaking as a person, a one-night thing where we're going to sweep in there with big guys and make this happen. This is a soft touch kind of deal. And at the end, Reserve Street will be closed.
Andy?
Thank you. I really appreciate this effort to house folks, and I especially appreciate Commissioner Barrow's comments about moving upstream. So I have questions about that, given that what you're talking about is housing folks who are unhoused now. And what Josh referenced about eviction moratorium ending, that's one form of eviction, but we have neighbors in this community being evicted every day by landlords who simply want to raise the rent. They're not behind on the rent. They're not people who are not accessing their money at the state level. They're people who are being evicted because the landlord wants to make repairs and raise the rent or sell it or do it as a weekly Airbnb. So what those measures, what kinds of measures regarding those temporary rentals, rent freezes, all of those different things is the city accountable for this problem?
So as you heard a couple of weeks ago, many of those options are not available to city or county government. We can't freeze rent, period. End of story. And if we could, that would come with all sorts of issues as well. But what you can do is, I'm frankly going to have I'm guessing, challenging conversation with landlord association and property management companies to understand A, what the reality is from their perspective, and B, what we as local government can do operating within the constraints that we operate in to solve for that. And I don't know the answer. I would suggest that you have a conversation with Representative Tannenbaum to have him lean on the government or on the governor to see if we can get some of this money out the door. And I guarantee you we'll give more notice to folks as we proceed through this process than the Montana legislature gave local governments throughout the last session.
Yeah, the state of Montana has done local government no favors here in Missoula County and elsewhere across the state. As recently as just on Friday, we met with the city of Missoula to talk about the American Rescue Plan dollars that have come our way and that also have come to the state of Montana and that are sitting over in Helena right now. And this would be a completely wasted opportunity if we did not try to leverage those resources from the current Biden administration into transformational change for our community. So this is evolving rapidly. Like I say, we met last week. We'll be meeting in the days to come with our community partners and particularly the city of Missoula to figure out how to collectively magnify our impact.
Just speaking as KGBO, I'm on for 90 minutes news every day from 6 to 8, or 2.5 hours. Then we have an hour and a half talk show every day. So from 6 to 10, we are communicating with people every day. And I would be absolutely thrilled if any or all of you, or one at a time, or a group, or whatever, you can come to my radio station. If you want to be on at 6 o'clock, we'll talk about this for the entire time I'm on the air, if you want to do that.
Sure.
I mean, if you're willing to do that, I am taking responsibility from my boss to say, if this is that important, we have about 25,000 people that listen to my show every day. And so if you want to get that message out, I am inviting you to come on when it's convenient.
We will do that. Yeah, some subset. I will not speak for the city of Missoula.
Yeah, I'm honored to be there. So is the mayor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invitation.
And you can just be on the phone if you have to come in, whatever you want to do. Be in your jam.
Person behind you.
wouldn't be NBC Montana if you didn't ask that question.
I have to. I'm told I have to.
This is a pro-squandering initiative.
Yeah,
We don't know yet because Adrienne and her team have not brought options to us, so we don't know what we're looking at yet. What we do know is we have American Rescue Plan money to begin with, and we'll see what we'll see what happens after that unfolds. But and I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. Right now, we're paying a cost. So to imagine that this doesn't cost anything right now and we're going to spend money is inaccurate. When you drive by and look at those encampments, that's a cost. When we reach out to our law enforcement on a regular basis to deal with things that aren't really 911 issues, that's a cost. When people use the emergency room like a doctor, that's a cost. And it's a cost that the greater we has said, we're done. We don't want to do that anymore. So we're going to try a different cost.
So I know it's not about money, but are these initiatives, do you think that they will decrease all of those costs?
That's the idea. I mean, that's the idea.
or they'll change them.
Yeah.
The temporary space that currently can house up to 40 people, how long will that space be available at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we're guaranteeing it through the end of a declared emergency, and we're not sure beyond that.
I did have a conversation. I did have a... Wonder where they're going. I did have a conversation with the landlord, the owner of that property, and he is very willing to continue to assist.
And I'm sorry if I missed this already, but was there a timeline of when there could be proposed other sites?
We're going to leave that to Adrienne and her team to sort. It may be easy or hard. We may have folks coming out of the woodwork offering alternatives, and we may be struggling.
Yeah, I will say I don't have a date as to when we can expect that, but work has begun, and we will be engaging with folks that know what they're talking about in this arena as to what we need to be considering for each site and to ensure that the services can be provided there. Just to reiterate that it may not be one thing, it may be a suite of things that we can deploy and that we can stand up so that we have those options or those alternatives to present to people who are illegally camping, and they can maybe choose amongst a suite of options.
Will most meetings be open for press or public, Adrienne?
So when we have something to convey to the commissioners and to the mayor and city council, that will initiate a public process as far as what we are proposing as far as potential options.
And I'll also mention in the meantime, with regard to, the cheapest housing today is housing that already exists and housing that folks already have. So the Bridge Apartments, for example, which some of you read about last week, we have an offer to purchase that property, and we are waiting to hear back from Western Montana Mental Health Center. And whenever we find those situations where folks may be displaced who are already housed, we're going to do our best to solve for that.
Just going back to the idea, the press release that came out was very strong on this idea of not allowing illegal camping at this point.
Again. Yeah, so we're talking about order, and I think I can channel Josh here. Let's talk about the order. We identify sites so that folks have alternatives. Before those sites are identified, but for the Broadway Island, folks are going to camp. Unless they're violent, unless they're camping on private property and we get a complaint, we're not in the business of chasing folks around, never have been. But we are complaint driven, and if a private property owner has somebody camping in their yard, or there's a violent incident, or there's a health concern as presented by health department telling us we got a problem, or someone else telling us we have a problem, our first step is to find a place for people to be. Do okay? All right. We wear you out? All right, once again, we really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to solving some very challenging problems for folks who need our help.